Mark Robert Rank, Poorly Understood, What America Gets Wrong About Poverty. In an engaging and well-organized exploration of poverty in America, Poorly Understood, What America Gets Wrong About Poverty, by Mark Robert Rank seeks to challenge the myths and stereotypes surrounding this complex issue. The book summary delves into an assortment of topics, such as the differences between various measures of poverty, the common misconceptions about who the poor are, and the tangible link between poverty and societal challenges. The author also calls out the inaccuracies of the belief that poverty is unavoidable and draws our attention towards more effective approaches in combating poverty.
Myths and misconceptions about poverty. Poverty refers to those who cannot earn enough to manage their basic needs, yet many stereotypes divide the poor and the non-poor. The typical perception portrays poverty as a long-term dweller in the inner-city ghetto on welfare programs. However, this is not the case, as poverty can affect anyone, including the working class. More than half of Americans between 20 to 75 years old will experience poverty below the poverty line for at least a year, and almost 65% of Americans will turn to a social assistance program. Poverty can be measured by comparing the income of an individual to that of the whole nation. Stereotyping the poor can foster a certain degree of hostility and resentfulness from the non-poor who embrace the stereotypes. While poor people are mostly self-sufficient, these biases can impact public policies and the allocation of resources in a negative way. The reality of poverty in America. Many Americans associate poverty with people of color living in inner-city neighborhoods, but this stereotype is not entirely accurate. In reality, poverty has shifted to the suburbs and rural areas, particularly among white Americans. By 2000, only 10% of America's poor lived in inner-city neighborhoods. The media has perpetuated this myth by portraying poverty as mainly affecting people of color. However, most poor Americans are white because there are far more white people in the United States than African Americans, Hispanics, or Native Americans. It is important to recognize these facts to better understand the complexities of poverty in America and to provide equal opportunities for all individuals regardless of their racial background or geographic location. The myths surrounding poverty. Poverty in America is often viewed as a personal failure of the impoverished. Many believe that hard work alone can prevent poverty, but factors such as discrimination and low-paying jobs make it difficult to escape. The idea that education and skills training are enough to avoid poverty is also flawed, since there aren't enough high-quality jobs to go around. It's time to dispel these myths and address poverty at its core. Poverty is not inevitable. Poverty is not a fact of life but an issue that can be overcome with effective policies. The idea that poverty cannot be eradicated is misleading. The war on poverty implemented during President Lyndon Johnson's administration aimed to reduce extreme need. It included programs like the Food Stamp Act, Medicaid, and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, among others. While poverty was not completely eliminated, the overall poverty rate in America reduced by half, and child poverty dropped from 27.3% to 14.4% by the early 1970s. Contrary to popular belief, Ronald Reagan's claim that the war on poverty made things worse is unfounded, and government programs can considerably alleviate poverty. The problem lies in the lack of willingness to pursue effective approaches, with conservative politicians using the false notion of inevitability to promote their ideology. It is imperative to understand that the fight against poverty is not impossible but requires a collective effort towards implementing sustainable solutions. Poverty in the United States. Contrary to what the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, reports, poverty in the United States is significant. Almost half of impoverished households fall far below the poverty line, and compared to other developed countries, the U.S. has a significantly higher poverty rate. Poverty has social consequences such as shorter lifespans, lack of political participation, and discrimination against individuals who access social assistance programs. Despite evidence to the contrary, the myth that the poor in the U.S. are not doing so badly still circulates and diminishes the struggles of those living in poverty. The two-faced effects of poverty. Poverty is usually borne by the poor, and it has immense effects on both their physical and mental health. Furthermore, the development of children is slowed down in impoverished environments. Poverty doesn't only have direct effects, but it also impacts the nation as a whole. Non-impoverished individuals are often unaware of poverty's economic effects. It leads to an increase in crime and healthcare costs while reducing the nation's overall productivity. Furthermore, poor children remain poor as they grow up, creating unqualified employees, elevated healthcare spending, and criminal justice system problems. To put it bluntly, it is within our economic interest to address poverty. Misunderstandings about welfare in the U.S. Welfare programs in the U.S. are not excessive, but instead, the money spent to alleviate poverty is much lower than needed to meet the basic needs of the poor. Rather than discouraging individuals from working, the evidence suggests that welfare programs actually increase employment. Despite this, persistent misconceptions concerning welfare programs are used to justify keeping benefit levels low. Fraud is not as widespread as the media may claim, and where it does occur, it's often a result of errors in the system rather than individuals attempting to cheat the system. In fact, the instances of fraud are lower than the instances of error in applications for benefits. Redefining anti-poverty policies. Poverty eradication through structural changes. The persistence of poverty in America calls for a re-evaluation of traditional anti-poverty policies. Current policies focus on individual responsibility, assuming that poverty occurs based on personal shortcomings. This approach ignores the role of structural deficiencies as the cause of poverty. An effective anti-poverty methodology should address structural changes that would enable more individuals and families to sustain themselves financially. Government can introduce policies such as wage subsidies to prompt employers to create more jobs with better pay. Moreover, the creation of a social safety net that includes public goods such as healthcare is essential. The United States could also introduce the concept of a universal basic income, UBI, to provide an alternative to existing programs. European nations use such a plan to give cash to parents for raising their families, improving their physical and mental well-being. The goal of poverty eradication policies shouldn't take a short-term approach, but instead should aim to build individual, family, and community assets. Focusing on long-term strategies, anti-poverty policies that tackle structural issues can reduce the risk of individuals and families falling into poverty.
Mark Robert Rank's Poorly Understood: What America Gets Wrong About Poverty sheds light on the truth behind poverty in America, debunking long-held myths and stereotypes. The book's summary emphasizes that the majority of the poor are not what they are commonly believed to be, and that poverty affects a wide range of Americans throughout their lives. Moreover, it clearly illustrates that poverty is not inevitable, and various measures can be taken to alleviate poverty considerably. The prevalent stereotypes about the poor hinder effective policies and public support for much-needed safety nets, leaving countless people vulnerable to a cycle of need. By understanding poverty's realities and complexities, we can identify better approaches to providing economic security for all.